the Zero Carbon Act. Kia ora.
I call Andrew Bailey.
I was enjoying that speech so much, I'm surprised it ended so quickly. I am. So it's an absolute pleasure to be talking on this third reading of the Taxation, Neutralising Base Erosion and Profit Shifting Bill. And of course, this, as I think many people alluded to, Madam Speaker, was one of the most complicated tax bills come before not only the Finance and Expenditure Committee, but also this House for quite some period of time. And of course, its genesis had long-standing roots. And of course, going back in the days when National was running the country, well, I may say, Madam Speaker, one of the issues that did come to our attention and was noted in the media, and of course we had an opposition baying for blood that we weren't doing enough, was the issue of tax and making sure that everyone was paying their fair share of tax. And of course, we all need to pay our fair share of tax. And what this bill is, it's a very good bill promoted initially by Honourable Todd McLeay and then, of course, by the Honourable Judith Collins. And it's so, in effect, it's a National Party bill. But I do have to acknowledge the Honourable Stuart Nash for seeing this through to completion and to see it into the House having its third reading tonight. And what this is about is actually meeting our requirements under OECD requirements around profit shifting. And I know there's been a lot of discussion about it, but essentially what profit shifting is, it's multinationals who have operations in New Zealand who use means to otherwise reduce their profit. And those means might be that they take on an extraordinary amount of debt, more than what would be normally required, and consequently they have a high interest cost, and therefore that's why the profit is reduced, and that's why the profit of the New Zealand entity and the tax that the New Zealand entity pays is lower than it should be. The other way is around high interest rates, and that's another way of reducing the profit and therefore the tax. Another way is transfer pricing. And what I mean by that, Madam Speaker, because I know you're an expert on this, is how international companies with New Zealand subsidiaries use the price transfer rate for what the products or services that are transferred between countries, how you price that as a way and can be used as a way to minimise profit and therefore tax. Other ways are around how the multinational might impose a high management fee on the New Zealand operation, and again that reduces profit and therefore tax. And these are all mechanisms that sophisticated companies use around the world, not just in New Zealand, of course, to minimise tax. And of course, they take those profits back to low tax jurisdictions, often called tax havens, and therefore that's where they account for the profit. And obviously, what this bill is about is making sure that New Zealand is not disadvantaged. Now, the whole process to get to the point today followed an OECD process which set about working with a whole lot of countries around the world, principally the OECD, but it's not limited to that, to come up with a group of policies and rules to make sure that multinationals couldn't shift their profits around and therefore artificially lower their tax requirement. And New Zealand played quite a role in leading those discussions. And this is what's come about over now, I would think, Madam Speaker, probably 3-year process, maybe even longer, to get to this point. And of course, there was a lot of people saying, come on, hurry up, do it, you need to do something. And of course, we were keen to do something. But what the result of this bill is more than just New Zealand meeting its requirements. It is actually New Zealand meeting its requirements in the context of everyone in the major international community also meeting theirs and putting in similar rules, because only when you have a web of countries putting in these rules that they will have the effect that we need to make sure it comes to pass. So there was a lot of discussion around this bill. We made a lot of changes. And I think one of the things, I'll just summarise, the bill really deals with high artificial interest rates and debt levels, which I talked about, Also, it dealt with the issue of what's a permanent establishment in New Zealand. And, of course, government members might be asking themselves, what does that mean? So what that means, just to help some of the members in the House, is that in terms of how a multinational may operate in New Zealand, it has various options that it can use. It can either form a subsidiary company, it might even set up a branch structure, or it might even have a sales representative office. Or it may even use sort of other non-corporate type structures like partnership arrangements. And depending on how they are deemed, whether they're a permanent establishment or not, makes it difficult in terms of assessment of profit. And part of the rule was, part of the changes we were clear in the bill about was what is the definition of a permanent establishment. And in some cases, multinationals achieve a lot of profits in New Zealand just by having a sales office. So one of the rules, for instance, Madam Speaker, is that if a multinational has sales of more than euro 750 million and they have a sales office in New Zealand, that is deemed a permanent establishment and therefore is caught by the taxation rules around this. Also, as I talked about, inappropriate transfer pricing arrangements and using what's called hybrid and brand mismatches to exploit tax situations. And again, mismatching of or use of hybrid instruments. I see you looking at me, Madam Speaker, so I just thought I'd just clarify that small aspect for you. So what that might mean, there is a big difference between using terms such as, or instruments such as debt instrument, a loan, or a debt instrument of some sort, or an equity instrument such as buying some shares. And in between you have what's called hybrid instruments. And they might be, for instance, redeemable cumulative preference shares, which means that the dividend is cumulative, there is a dividend, but it may be redeemable for a debt instrument. And there are whole lots of permutations. I could keep going on about a whole lot of hybrid instruments, Madam Speaker. But what those are, what they mean is that in some countries, what you might do is make sure that the instrument looks like it's a debt instrument, and therefore the interest cost is deductible in New Zealand. But when you take the other side of the ledger, because accounting always has debits and credits, as we all know, Rudyard Kipling, on the other side, it might be a multinational with its head office or its regional office in Australia. In that jurisdiction, it is treated as an equity instrument. And therefore, you have a mismatch between the two countries of where the tax is paid and where it's deducted. And those are hybrid instruments, and that's where you have the mismatch. And the bill seeks to clarify some of those mismatch arrangements. I think some of the big things, the big change we made was the one of the rights of the IRD to be able to go to multinationals and say, and it might be a smaller sales office, as I said, and say, we want all your information and we need you to present it to us. We made a change around those rules. At the moment, previously the initial draft was it was very draconian. We said, no, there needs to be some more rules around that to make sure that the IOD has appropriate powers to request that information, but you couldn't necessarily sue a salesman in New Zealand, both in a civil and a criminal perspective, for not failing to provide some of that information. So we limited it just to civil. The other one was the rights of IRD to actually challenge multinationals' tax position in New Zealand. And initially they asked for 7 years. We believe that was too long. At the moment, their rights are not that. And so what we did, we put in place an arrangement for the IRD so that they would have to notify the multinational within 4 years that they were going to make a claim or dispute a tax calculation. And then they would then have, at the end of the 4-year period, they could have that notify of that dispute, and then they'd have a further 3 years to take the action and clarify it. And so part of it was making sure that the IRD has the right powers to go and enforce and get the tax revenue that New Zealand is justifiably entitled to, But on the other side, Madam Speaker, to make sure that the powers of the IRD were appropriate and warranted. And I think we ended up with a great bill. I'd like to acknowledge the officials, I'd like to acknowledge all the submitters and support the bill.
The next call is a split call. I call Michael Wood.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, there was a day when I thought that my